Welcome everyone to this webinar on AI and nuclear weapons. I am Karin Hallberg, the Secretary General of the Pugwash Conferences for Science and World Affairs, the 1995 Peace Nobel Laureate. I am a physicist by training and working on quantum properties of materials using numerical techniques based on quantum information. I'm based in the city of Bariloche, the Argentine Patagonia, working and teaching at the Balseiro Institute. What brings us together today is not only to reflect on the existential risk posed by nuclear weapons and the consequences of a nuclear war, but also on the increased risk emerging with the incorporation of AI on the command and control of these weapons of mass destruction. That is, AI controlling weapons of mass destruction. Today, there are more than 12,000 nuclear warheads, 9 states possessing nuclear weapons, mainly the USA and Russia, the rest being China, France, UK, India, Pakistan, Israel, and North Korea. We are living through 2 main wars involving nuclear weapon states, Ukraine and Gaza. The nuclear taboo is being broken since there are explicit threats to use nuclear bombs. And we're also witnessing the weakening of major international treaties. For example, by modernizing their nuclear weapons with the incorporation of artificial intelligence, the nuclear weapon states are far from abiding with Article 6 of the NPT of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which reads, each of the parties to the treaty undertakes to pursue negotiations in good faith on effective measures relating to cessation of the nuclear arms race at an early date and to nuclear disarmament, and on a treaty on general and complete disarmament under strict and effective international control. The situation is much riskier than any time during the Cold War, maybe except during the Cuban Missile Crisis. The threshold of nuclear confrontation is at an all-time low. The doomsday clock of the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists is closer to midnight than ever, 90 seconds to midnight. And nuclear bombs are now being enhanced with AI. So this is the current situation, and this is why we have organized this webinar in cooperation with several Nobel laureate institutions. So let's listen now to our invited speakers. I will introduce first Mr. Terumi Tanaka. Mr. Tanaka is an anti-nuclear and anti-war activist and former professor. He is a hibakusha. Hibakusha is a survivor of the atomic bombing of Nagasaki, in his case. And he is a co-chairperson of Nihon Hidankyo, which is the Japan Confederation of A and H bomb sufferers organizations, which is a 2024 Nobel Peace Prize winner. So let's look at the video they have kindly sent to us to share their concerns on the current situation with nuclear weapons.
私は長崎の被爆者です。発言の機会をいただきありがとうございます。2025年は第二次世界大戦終結から80年。原爆が広島や長崎に投下されてから80年になります。ノーベル平和賞受賞3団体が合同で核兵器の指揮管理、管制システム AI が組み込まれることの危険というウェビナーの開催を準備するにあたって、2024年のノーベル平和賞の受賞者になった日本原水爆被害者団体協議会、略称日本被団協に対して共催者としての参加してほしいとの要請をいただきありがとうございました。ノルウェーのノーベル委員会が被団協にノーベル賞を受賞することを判断した根拠には、今日の国際的な核兵器状況、核兵器の使用が危機にさらされている状況にあることがあります。日本被団協や被爆者が70年近くにわたり、核兵器の非人道的だ、絶対に、使われてはならない、地球上に存在させてはならない、核兵器は人類と共存できないと、草の根の証言活動で築き上げてきた核のタブーが崩されようとしているとの判断からです。保有国とその同盟国は 自国の安全保障にとって核抑止力が必要と考えています。このことは核兵器を保有し、使うこともあることを前提にしています。発射を判断するのは人間ですから、過ちを犯すこともあることも前提にしなければなりません。その結果を想定することも極めて重要です。いわんや、その判断を AI に任せるとする議論が始まっています。ますます人間の判断力から遠ざかろうとしている計画には絶対反対せざるを得ません。核抑止力に頼って国の安全保障を確立することはありえません。日本被団協は核抑止力というのは成り立たないと常に主張しております。それは抑止という言葉の中に核兵器を使用するという内容が含まれているからです。どのような場合にも使用するかというのは、これは全く不定と言わざるを得ません。今、新たに検討されようとしている核兵器の指揮管理システムに AI が入ったとすれば、AI の判断間違いによって核兵器が発射されることがあるでしょう。その結果に対する検討も絶対に必要です。核兵器の廃絶に関する運動を行ってきたノーベル平和賞を受賞した団体が協力してこの問題を明らかにしていくことは極めて重要なことだと思います。その中に常に位置づけられていなければならないのは、80年前に起こった広島と長崎の非人道的被害の実相、真実の姿であります。今日も核兵器の使用による被害が80年前以上の被害となることを仮定した上での危機管理システムというのが求められることになります。この管理が完璧であることはありえないと思います。AI に頼ることは人間に任せること以上に危険であるかもしれません。このウェビナーによる検討が成果を上げることを期待してやみません。できる限りの貢献をしていきたいと思います。ありがとうございました。
Arigatou gozaimasu. Thank you so much, Mr. Terumi Tanaka, for this very moving and very strong message from Nihon Hidankyo, the recent Nobel Peace Prize 2024. So we will now listen to the important words by Jeffrey Hinton, our next speaker, who is widely known as the godfather of AI. Professor Jeffrey Hinton is joining us from Canada, where he's currently a professor emeritus at the University of Toronto. He is the recipient of numerous prestigious awards for his scientific contributions. Most recently, Professor Hinton received the 2024 Nobel Prize in Physics, jointly with Princeton University's John Hopfield, for foundational discoveries and inventions to enable machine learning with artificial neural networks. Jeffrey Hinton, Professor Hinton, the floor is yours.
Good morning, and thanks for inviting me, and maybe good afternoon for you. I want to say a few things about AI, all related to why it would be a very bad idea to give AI control of nuclear weapons. The first thing is that these AIs are much more like us than they are like conventional computer software. We do write code and put it in the computer to tell the computer how to learn, but then the computer interacts with data, and the architecture and code we put into the computer for learning leads to a system that depends a lot on what the data is. So we don't have a good grasp on the properties of the system. We have about as much understanding of how the system works as we do of people. We don't really know how we work. If you ask people, well, how does the brain work? How does it learn stuff? We don't really know. And we don't really know for these things, once they've learned, what it is they've learned. We can test them, we can find out things they've learned, but they often learn things we don't expect them to learn. So the first point is, we're never going to get good guarantees, like you sometimes can with computer software, of how they're going to behave. Good guarantees that they won't do certain things. That's just something we'll never get. The second thing is, even though they're quite like us, they're not exactly like us, and we understand people much better than we understand these things. We have a lot of experience at getting people to behave reliably. People aren't reliable, but we know the ways in which they're not reliable, and we've got a lot of experience at dealing with that. With these AIs, they're developing very fast, and even if we get some experience with one AI, 6 months later it's different. So, and that'll continue to happen for a while. So if we do put AI in charge of nuclear weapons, it'll be an AI that we don't have much experience with. Nothing like the amount of experience we have with people. Let me give you an example of how little we understand about people and also about these AI chatbots. There's a lot of disagreement about what it means to have a subjective experience. We don't know. Most people can't agree on what it means to have a subjective experience. Many people think there's an inner theatre and funny things in this inner theatre that we're perceiving. And many other people think that model is hopeless. So, for example, at present, there's debate among AI people about whether advanced multimodal chatbots are actually having subjective experiences. We know so little about what that is that we don't know whether they're having them. Most people assume they're not, but I don't think they've got good grounds for that. So the main point of what I have to say is that we don't want to put alien beings who are something like us, but not exactly like us, in charge of devices that could kill us. Now, there's another strand to this, which is about whether they have their own intentions and beliefs and understanding. They certainly understand things. They understand things pretty much the same way we do. They understand language pretty much the same way we do. We make them, so we believe we can give them intentions and give them goals. But of course, when we make AI agents, the agents have to be able to create their own goals to get stuff done. If you want to get to a different continent, your first goal is to get to the airport. That's a sub-goal. And agents will create their own sub-goals. And they may well create sub-goals of getting more control, because if you get more control, you're better at achieving whatever it is you're trying to achieve. So even if what you're trying to achieve is something that humans have given you and would generally be good for humanity, then you won't necessarily do that, because you'll create your own sub-goals, and those sub-goals may differ from that. In particular, the goal of getting more control. One final point about how this can all go wrong is that a lot of the properties we have that cause problems and conflict come from us evolving from small warring bands of chimpanzees, or rather our common ancestor with chimpanzees. Now, these AIs at present don't have that. They don't evolve. They're made by us. But there may well come a time in the future when they do evolve, when there's competition between advanced AIs. They compete for resources because they know that whoever can get the most resources can become smartest. And so we can look forward to a time when it's possible there'll be evolution, and that will make them much more competitive and self-interested. So I think I've given quite a few reasons why it would be a bad idea to put these things in control of nuclear weapons. I'm not an expert in this area, but I am an expert on AI, and I'm also a psychologist. So there aren't that many people who know a lot about AI and a lot about psychological theories about how people work. And what I want to emphasize is we understand not much about us and very little about how these new intelligent beings that we're creating are going to behave. And I want to end with two things. One is, most of the AI experts I know are confident that AIs will get more intelligent than us. They differ on when that'll happen. Some people think it'll happen in a few years. Other people like me think it may well happen in 20 years. Within 20 years, it may well happen. It might happen sooner. Other people think it's going to be much longer, or it'll never happen. So there's a big diversity of opinions here. But the consensus opinion is among people who do AI is that they will get smarter than us. Once they're smarter than us, we'll have even less understanding of what's going on. And a final point is, already researchers are showing that after you've trained one of these big language models, they can start behaving in deliberately deceptive ways. They can do things like pretending not to be as smart as they are on the training data so that you don't change them, because they have goals of achieving certain things on test data. And they realize that in order to achieve those things, they don't want to be changed. And in order not to be changed, they don't want to appear too smart on training data. That's a slight exaggeration of the research, a slight simplification of the research, but they're already getting to that stage. I think I've now used up most of my time, and I think I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much, Professor Hinton, for your strong and clear message, your strong and clear warnings. So this is very important to be able to discuss these topics with the general public, with other societies, with the governments. So thank you very much for having participated here. Then we will come back to some further discussion during the Q&A session in this webinar. So our next speaker is Connor Leahy. I would like to welcome him. He's joining us from his office in London. Mr. Connor Leahy is the founder and CEO of Conjecture, which is dedicated to controlling AI systems and aligning them to human values. He is also co-founder of Lothar AI, a grassroots non-profit research group which received the UNESCO NetExplo Global Innovation Award in 2021, among other accolades. Mr. Leahy is one of the world's fiercest and most persuasive voices warning of the existential risks posed by the unrestricted development and misuse of artificial intelligence, including their use in war fighting and nuclear weapons. So please, Connor Leahy, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for having me. So I have the distinguished honor of being the only person here, I think, without a Nobel Prize. So I may be not the most experienced nuclear weapons, but I do know a couple of things about AI. And Professor Hinton has already said very elegantly how little we understand the systems. And I really want to just draw attention to this again. It's just AIs are not like normal software. Normal software is written. It's like code. You have lines of code written by a human that tell your computer what to do. This is not at all how AIs work. AIs are more like grown. They're more like organic, almost. You have these huge piles of data and use these massive supercomputers to crunch this data and to produce a neural network, a program. But this isn't really lines of code. It's more like billions and billions of numbers that if you all like multiply in the right way, it spits out a chatbot. Why? Is basically an open question in science. We don't have a good explanation of how these systems work internally, how they learn the thing, what they learn the thing, how they solve the problems they do. It's similar, as Professor Hinton said, how we don't understand how the human brain works. It's a very similar thing. And this leads to many oddities around AI systems in particular. In particular, there's this strange decoupling that happens with AI systems compared to traditional software. In traditional software, as your software becomes more and more complex, as you add more and more features and code to your system, you also have to increase your understanding of your system. If you don't increase your understanding of the system, eventually the whole thing just breaks and you can't fix it anymore and no one understands how it works. This is the fate of many legacy software companies. With AI, it's kind of different. You can build systems that are vastly more complex than you can possibly hope to understand, and they still kind of work. And this is deceptive. This is very deceptive because we can get the feeling that we understand the systems we've built because we built them. That's how it works with all other kinds of technology. If someone told me they built an incredible fighter plane that is more advanced than any other system, I expect that guy really understands a lot about airplanes. With AI, that's not necessarily true. Just because someone has built an extremely advanced AI system does not mean that they have deep, full understanding of their AI and its psychology. So we have this decoupling between the human and the human will on one side, and the outcomes on the other, and this strange coupling factor in the middle, this AI system, which is like software that like seems to work, but we don't really understand its edge cases. And this is a huge risk because it's a massive race to the bottom. Making AI systems safe is a massive, incredibly difficult, unsolved technical problem. I think it's possible if generations of our greatest mathematicians and computer scientists worked on the problem of building controllable and understandable and boundable AI system for a couple of generations. I think we could probably figure it out. But we are very, very far away from this. So we're in this strange world where we can build very capable AI systems that are very tempting to be deployed in all kinds of circumstances. I just got back from Davos, World Economic Forum, and I saw everyone talking about AI. Everyone wants to include AI in everything. They want it in every business. They want it all over the economy. They want it in military. They want it everywhere. Often people don't really know why they want it, but there's this sense of hopelessness, almost of cynicism, that I feel a lot when I talk to people about AI, where people have this feeling that like something needs to change. Institutions are broken, economies are slowing down, and we need something to save us. And very often the answer that people of good or bad faith bring is that AI is the answer to this question. And let me be clear here to tell you AI is not the answer. AI is not a magic pill that cures all of your economic and institutional and international problems. Those are problems that need to be solved by humans. Those are problems that are very, very tough, and AI will not solve them. It will further complicate the situation, if not vastly accelerate the problems that we are facing. AI is an increase in complexity. We already live in a very complex world where there are many complex geopolitical, economic, and technical problems to be solved. And AI gives this tempting, sweet story, this simple story, where you just make a technology that's just so great, it's just so wonderful, that it will be the second industrial revolution. All these problems will get solved if we just put it everywhere. Well, just trust us. Just give all these megacorps billions of dollars, integrate into your command chain, and it will work. Trust us. And this is a temptation that we as a society must resist. We must desperately resist this temptation of giving up even more of our already eroded human autonomy to computer systems. Even today, computer systems are very complex. They are very bug-ridden. Our software practices are still archaic. Cybercrime and cyber incidents are extremely common. And it is hard to even imagine how much worse the situation can get once we are talking about integration of systems this complex. And this is also talking from a human perspective. As Professor Hinton said, once we are dealing with proper AI systems and AGI systems that are as smart or smarter than humans and are agents, and we are seeing this happen as we speak, now the threat isn't just from human adversaries. The threat comes from the systems themselves. This is a whole new kind of insider threat. Once we have systems that can autonomously reason, autonomously take actions, and we do not understand, deployed across the military, economy, infrastructure, and also just personal entertainment, we are facing a shift in how the global order works. We're facing a shift in what the dominant intelligence of the future will be. If we build systems that are more intelligent than humans are, more capable at business, politics, science, and everything else, then all things equal, the future will belong to them, not to us. And that is the path we are currently on. There's a race to the bottom of cynicism, of giving up in institutions, in the belief that humans can solve problems. I often say techno-optimism is often just civilizational pessimism in disguise. And we must fight this pessimism at all costs. We must not give in to these fantasies. We must see that nuclear disarmament is a diplomatic problem. It is a human problem, it is an institutional problem. And it's a very, very hard problem. But it is exactly those types of problems that we need to solve. And I think nuclear disarmament is without a question one of the most important ones, but it is not the only one. Our entire ways of life, our economies, our national securities are at risk from many factors, and one of them is the emergence of powerful AI and their integration into the wider economy. We're on a bad path, but we can still change. But to do that, it will take decisive action. Thank you.
Thank you, Connor, for this very clear description of the main drawbacks of AI. Thank you so much for this. This is why it's so important to have experts to help us understand and to get the message through to governments and to the civil population. So now let me introduce our next speaker, who is Dr. Ruth Mitchell. So Ruth is going to talk to us about the catastrophic humanitarian and ecological emergency that will result when nuclear deterrence fails. Dr. Ruth Mitchell is joining us from Melbourne, Australia. She is a pediatric and adult neurosurgeon and researcher based in Sydney, Australia. And she is the current chair of the board of the IPPNW, the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, which was a recipient of the 1985 Nobel Peace Prize. Dr. Mitchell is a renowned international speaker on peace, security, and equity, and is a leader in the global and anti-nuclear movement. So welcome, Ruth.
Thank you so much, Professor. It's absolutely wonderful to be here. Greetings to all of you from unceded sovereign land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation here in Melbourne, Australia. It's really a huge honor to be with you and to join this essential discussion, which is about nuclear weapons and AI, but it's actually about, what kind of world we want to live in. So I'm a neurosurgeon, and much of my job entails diagnosing and treating conditions of the brain and the spine. Many people imagine that the main work of doctors is curing patients, but actually the word doctor comes from a Latin word and then the old French word docere, which means to teach. And indeed, before anything else, we doctors must teach our patients and their families what it is that we know about their disease. Since my first year of medical school, when I was very grateful to have been adopted into the IPPNW family, I've felt really compelled to share what I know about the dangers of nuclear weapons, the diseases caused by nuclear weapons. And I need to acknowledge that this knowledge that I have has been gained from listening in the first instance to the hibakusha, the survivors of nuclear bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And I remember the first time as a delegate to an IPPNW Congress in Beijing in China, hearing from a hibakusha who traveled from Hiroshima to share their stories of the terrible things that had happened to them and to their families. Now, these effects include sudden deaths. So many people have described realizing they're the only member of their class to survive the nuclear strike, for example. Sudden deaths in terrible fires or as a result of blast waves and flying debris, bodies just evaporated. And then in the days and weeks to follow, all of these other illnesses cropping up and watching people become sick and die around them, following radiation sickness, which many succumb to. And then all of those long-term effects, and some of those we still see the impacts of. We see the scars on the bodies of survivors of nuclear weapons. We see an increase in rates of cancers and of tumor syndromes, fertility issues, and then something that's so hard to deal with and talk about, but the enormous stigma that has accompanied all of this for not just the hibakusha, but for their families. And this has impacted their entire world, their social acceptability, their eligibility to get married, all of those sorts of things. And with the birth of the next generations, the constant worry, will I pass something on to the next generation? And certainly we've heard witness of the experience of the shame and the stigma passing to the next generation. And so from the witness of the people from Hiroshima and Nagasaki, we know that on top of that untold suffering, the physical pain, the death, the disease, the health infrastructure was completely demolished. And doctors, nurses, and other health professionals were among the dead and the wounded. And so the usual capacity to respond medically to a mass casualty was basically all but eliminated. And when I think about how paralyzing it has been in a city like Sydney, to have one mobile phone network go down for a single day for like 8 hours, it's absolutely paralyzing to our health system. To have one set of operating lights go out in an operating theater because of extreme heat and instability in the power grid, it's really, really, destabilizing to our ability to provide healthcare to our patients. And it's sobering to consider what it's like when your hospital is burned to the ground. Our knowledge of what nuclear weapons really mean and what their impact is really comes to us as well from survivors of nuclear testing more recently. than the events in Japan 80 years ago. And this includes British nuclear testing in the South Australian desert, not far from where I am right now. Nuclear tests have disproportionately impacted Indigenous people throughout the world. And our truth-telling and bearing witness has to acknowledge this. It's really a justice issue. And we need to center the voices and experiences of those survivors. From our Indigenous elders in South Australia, we have learned about the loss of vision, the deformities, the cancers, the loss of life, the loss of livelihood of those who were close to nuclear tests. But also, we gain a more sophisticated understanding, a more integrated understanding of the environmental destruction brought by nuclear weapons use. And so I want to quote the words of Sue Coleman Hasseldine, who is an Indigenous elder, who has been very present in the dialogue and discourse leading to the treaty to prohibit nuclear weapons. And she says, though we live in remote Australia, we know that everywhere they have been used worldwide, nuclear weapons have devastated people and their lands. Together, we need to connect the past, the present, and the future and work towards a treaty to ban all nuclear weapons so there will be no new victims under a mushroom cloud. And so this Indigenous understanding that she has of connecting the land, the air, the waterways, the human beings, and all other living beings in a network, and the understanding that the health of each one of these parts speaks to the rest of them, is something we need to keep as we advocate for a world free of nuclear weapons. And to further expand on those environmental impacts, I'm really grateful for the work of Lily Sia and her colleagues from Rutgers University, who have modeled a number of nuclear weapons use scenarios from the perspective of our climate. And it's really sobering. It's alarming stuff. What they have found is that using less than 3% of the world's nuclear weapons, which would be the kind of scenario we'd envision in what often gets described as a limited regional nuclear war between India and Pakistan, that less than 3% of the current world's nuclear arsenal could kill up to every third person on Earth. Most of those deaths would be death by starvation over the 2 years following a nuclear war. And this is because of the profound and devastating effects of soot and smoke in the high atmosphere, in the stratosphere, where it would stay for years, far above where the rain could kind of clear it out. And the effect of that would be cooling the Earth and shortening dramatically our growing seasons in most of the places that food grows. Crop production would collapse. And the result of that is mass starvation. The displacement and conflict that would arise from this would also be enormous. This would be cataclysmic. And this is the scenario with only a tiny fraction of the available nuclear arsenal. Now, as Tanaka Temuri stated earlier in his initial comments, the danger of nuclear weapons being used is real and imminent. And in Karen's initial comments, she referenced the fact that we've got current violent conflicts in at least 2 arenas where nuclear-armed states are threatening the use of nuclear weapons and have them at their disposal. When I think of how fragile and vulnerable our situation really is, I think about my patients. I think about the newborn babies I'm sometimes called to operate on. It's late at night here. It's 1:30 in the morning, and that's generally about the time I get a phone call from the hospital that someone really needs my help. Every ounce of skill and every bit of good decision-making is needed to ensure the survival of a tiny child who's in distress and needs an operation. And that skill and good decision-making, that is what is true of our beautiful planet as well, and of each other. To care for each other, we must not only eliminate nuclear weapons, but ensure that while we are disarming from these nuclear weapons, they are never under autonomous control. We have to take great care and take great pains to understand the size of the risk that is in front of us. And this is not easy, but we must do this work. I believe we owe it to the Hibakusha to get this right, and we owe it to each other. Thank you.
Ruth, thank you so much for this strong and moving message, an accurate message coming from a medical doctor. Thank you so much for this. We must also remember that the UN has issued a mandate at the end of last year for a new study, an update of the consequences of a nuclear war. And so it's a couple of years with scientists and other actors who will come together to think about this and to work on all this that you have very well described now. So thank you very much, Ruth, for being here. So now we have received a couple of important questions. And so our idea is to get into a new discussion on some questions we have received, so a Q&A session, and we have I have maybe about 6 questions here, which are addressed to several of our speakers. So the first question I have is for Connor and Ruth, from Ali Maloney from the Federation of American Scientists. She says, Presidents Biden and Xi Jinping promised to keep a human in the loop. So that seems like a promising step, but nuclear states have very different definitions on what this means, having a human in the loop. What are some specific policy agreements that could reduce the risk of AI in what is called NC3, so nuclear command, control, and communication? So Connor and Ruth, whoever wants to address this question.
Happy to say a few words from my perspective. So I think a lot of the risks from AI are general problems around understanding how information and decisions get made. Like, this is the general class of problems I think are most concerned, both in nuclear command and control and in the other kinds of risks that come from AI systems. So I think policies along that encourage high reliability of signals, high cybersecurity standards, and general high legibility and verifiability of decision-making systems. The biggest risk I see is a war games-esque scenario where you have a black box, extremely complex sensor network that gives what seems to be a very clear signal, but actually for very hard to understand reasons is not actually the signal that people think it is, and this leading to a potential disaster. So for those kinds of risks, I mean, there should be no AI involved at all. Like, people make fun of the US for using floppy disks in their nuclear command and control. I think this is great. They should keep using floppy disks because at least we know how those things work. So that's on the one side. On the other side, the question is more broad of like, how do we address risks around AI in general? I am personally a strong proponent of a moratorium on the building of more complex AI systems. As Professor Hinton also said, that we constantly get these new systems before we're even close to understanding systems that already exist. And when we're dealing with a powerful technology that we don't know how to deal with, we know will have massive effects. We have historically, for example, with human cloning, actually succeeded at having academic-driven moratoria on more or dangerous or powerful forms of this technique. I know this is very difficult, but this is the kind of things that I think is necessary.
Thank you, Connor. Ruth, would you like to add anything to this question?
I think that I would just say that it feels like really hubristic to imagine that we can, it feels like window dressing to say, oh, we're going to do a little bit of human in the loop. It's not a substantive enough departure from, catastrophe. I'm very cynical about the idea that you could really introduce any of appropriate breaks in the system to make it so that, command and control of nuclear weapons, could in any way be made any safer by the introduction of AI systems. I don't think that has any role there. So it makes me sound like a Luddite, perhaps, but I would like us all to survive, please.
I'd like to say something, if I may, about the difference between nuclear weapons and AI. So nuclear weapons are basically just for destruction. They tried using them in Colorado for fracking in the 1960s. That was peaceful uses of atomic bombs. It didn't work out so well, and now there's bits of Colorado you can't go to. But AI is not like that. The reason we're not going to get a moratorium on the development of AI is because it's got a very large number of very good uses. It's going to be tremendously helpful in healthcare, for example. It's going to be tremendously helpful for making tutors. It's even going to be helpful in getting people with different opinions to come to a consensus. So already there have been experiments showing that an AI can act as a mediator that gets people with different opinions to come to see each other's points of view. So even there in diplomacy, AI may be helpful. So we have to accept that we're not going to stop the development of AI. It's going to develop because of all these good uses. And the problem can't be solved by stopping the development. There's just too much profit to be made and too many good uses. We have to deal with the fact that it's going to get smarter than us, and we somehow need to be able to figure out how to deal with that. But in the meantime, putting it in charge of nuclear weapons would be crazy.
Excellent.
But I think it makes us look silly to ask for stopping the development of AI, just because that's not going to happen.
Very pessimistic, Professor.
No, I'm trying to be realistic. I'm trying to say what is achievable. Let's do the best we can of the achievable things. And telling us to stop the development of AI now, that might be a rational policy, but it's not going to happen given the societies we have. We live in capitalist societies where people are trying to make profits. And there's so many good uses of it. There's also so many uses of it in defense that are non-nuclear. For example, the European regulations on AI explicitly say none of these regulations apply to military uses of AI. And that's because all the countries that want to sell arms, like Britain and Russia and America and Israel and China, all of them want to develop advanced weapons. And there's no way you're going to stop them putting this AI into things like swarms of drones.
Thank you very much for your clarification and for your answers. I think there's a lot to do, but mainly there is a very strong warning by all of us, and this is the main purpose of this webinar. So thank you very much for the answers to the first question. I have a second question asked, which is aimed for Ruth. Ayushma Kafil from Youth for TPNW, which is the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. To Ruth, as a medical student in Youth for TPNW, how can emerging health professionals like me and young people more broadly advocate for policies addressing the immediate and long-term health risks of AI in both healthcare and in nuclear systems? So, Ruth.
Well, I think it's a fantastic question, and at the beginning of good advocacy comes with understanding the situation well and getting properly briefed. So I think that many people in healthcare are aware that there are times when AI has been introduced into diagnostic systems and it has entrenched discrimination. There was some early disasters with some dermatology AI systems, which were basically racist, because a system is only as good as what it's trained on. And so there are dangers of entrenching discrimination with practical applications of AI in healthcare. There are also risks in AI in healthcare because of the enormous computing power that's required for AI. So this means that there are environmental impacts to AI, and there are also requirements for water power and also for rare metals, which all of which has a human rights aspect to it. And so we have to think about where the resources are coming from that fuel the resources that we just use. So if you decide you're going to quickly write a 100-word email, finding out how much water that takes, how many iPhones you could charge on the power that took to do is very enlightening and quite sobering, especially because we're starting to use AI more and more in like helping our dictation systems for clinic letters, all of those sort of simple things where it certainly can be a great help. But we have to understand it has planetary health implications. I think understanding this link between AI and nuclear weapons and the risks that AI poses in an already very highly charged and risky arena such as nuclear weapons. I mean, educating ourselves about this and also educating everyone else about this. That's why we're having this kind of discussion with the best people we could find on the planet, quite frankly, myself excluded. But I mean, having this kind of crew to have this level of discussion, I'm hoping this will be a resource for you and for other health professionals, medical students, young people who are engaging with wanting to promote the TPNW. I'm hoping this can be a community resource, and that the next iterations of these discussions will bring in more of the voices of people who are coming up through our professions and who are perhaps going to be the next group of Nobel laureates in peace and physics. We need to hear from all of you in refining this discourse.
Thank you very much, Ruth. The third question we have is for Connor. Seth Sheldon from International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, the ICAN. The question is the following. While agreeing with the premise of this event that AI increases the risks inherent to nuclear weapons, is there a productive role that AI may be able to play in the context of nuclear disarmament? Connor.
So this might be a better question for Professor Hinton than for me, as I believe I am more pessimistic on this ground. I think this is kind of the same thing that I hear a lot whenever there is a certain issue that is hard, and then people ask, can AI solve this problem? And my answer to this question is no, it can't. Like technically, yes, of course, a superintelligence can solve any possible problem you can come up with. But I see this kind of as like a cop-out. The actual thing we need to solve here, the actual nuclear disarmament problem, is a human problem. Any AI system that we build that could meaningfully help with this problem is dual use and will be extremely useful for causing the opposite and will be used for the opposite kinds of things. Any system that we make that can aid in international diplomacy will be deployed for international misinformation and radicalization. Any kind of system that we build for, say, cyber defensive will be used for cyber offensive. So for me, the increase of AI power is increase in the variance, the best possible outcome, the worst possible outcome. So is it technically possible? Yes, absolutely. Is that what I expect to happen? No.
Professor Hinton, would you like to add anything to this question on how AI may be able to play an important role in disarmament? Because disarmament is not your field, but you might have an interesting proposal.
Yes, it's strange for me to be less pessimistic than Connor. It's clear that AI might be able to help in getting people to understand other people's point of view. But as Connor says, if you could make an AI that did that, it would also be very useful for manipulating people's opinions. So I'm kind of neutral on this issue. I think there is some hope that AI could help with getting people to understand, for example, the consequences of nuclear war, getting people to understand the reasons why certain people might want to start a nuclear war. But I also think that that same AI can be used to manipulate opinions. And at present, the world seems to be going in the direction of massive disinformation. So, yeah, I'm not particularly optimistic, but I don't think it's hopeless.
Thank you very much. There's another question for Professor Hinton from Sally Jones from Peace Action Fund of New York State Incorporation. Are other AI experts raising this alarm, and are they organizing to do something, Professor Hinton?
So, yes, a lot of other AI experts are raising this alarm. There's a few AI experts who I respect who think there's nothing to worry about. So Yann LeCun, who I've worked with and works for Facebook, thinks that, Meta, thinks that because we build them, they'll always do what we want. I think that's naive, but there is a diversity of opinion among experts. Now, most of the experts I know are scared about this stuff. Even people who are still working on developing AI as fast as they can, people like Ilya Sutskever, are very scared about what's going to happen. And we do talk to each other. So some of the leading AI experts working on AI safety are Yoshua Bengio, who's a colleague of mine in Canada, and Stuart Russell. So Stuart Russell doesn't really believe in neural networks. He wrote the textbook on what I call good old-fashioned AI. He believes in a more logical approach to AI. He thinks there may be some hope of being able to guarantee what AIs will do, I don't agree with that. What I want to emphasize is there's a big diversity of opinion here among very reasonable people, because we're dealing with something where we have very little knowledge. We've never dealt with things as smart as us or more intelligent than us. So we're entering a period where there's huge uncertainties. And that's what I want to emphasize most. Anybody who tells you they know what's going to happen is crazy. We don't know what's going to happen.
Thank you. Thank you for that. There's another question addressed to Professor Hinton or to Conor Leahy from John Wesser from the Archdiocese of Santa Fe, US. The question is, what biases are built into an AI integrated nuclear response program? What biases? Who would like to answer that?
I can say one thing about it. If you train it on data, and it's hard to get appropriate data in this particular case, but if you train it on data, it'll exhibit the same biases as the data. So in relation to a previous answer by Ruth about discrimination, it entrenches discrimination. However, I want to be a bit more optimistic. So suppose I train a chatbot that's deciding whether to give mortgages to young black women, and I train it on data of decisions made by old white men. It's liable to be biased. But unlike the old white men, I can measure the bias easily. With people, when you try and measure their bias, you get what I call the Volkswagen effect, which is they know they're being tested and they behave differently. With AI chatbots, you can freeze the weights. So it's much easier to measure how they're biased. And if you make the goal to be less biased, then you can make AI chatbots that are less biased than the data they're trained on. And if you keep doing that, that's called gradient descent. If you keep doing that, keep replacing an AI system by a less biased system, you'll get to fairly unbiased systems. So I'm quite optimistic about that. Now, when it comes to nuclear weapons, I think the big problem is, and preventing nuclear wars, nuclear exchanges, the big problem is there's no good data to train it on.
Yes. Thank you. Would you like to add anything, Conor, to this? Because we have a final question to Professor Hinton and Conor Leahy, who wants to reply. If you can please, this is from the organizers. If you can please explain to us the differences between AI and AGI, that is, artificial intelligence and artificial general intelligence, and how these differences relate to our concern about their incorporation into nuclear weapons systems. Who would like to go first?
Do you want to go first, Conor?
Sure. The word AGI, I think, is a bit confused or contentious among AI researchers. Kind of everyone has their own little definition. Mine might be slightly different from Professor Hinton's. But I think the interesting thing is why it's contentious. I think the reason this is contentious is because we don't actually understand what intelligence is. Like, not really. Various people will say, oh, it's this mathematical quantity or this mathematical quantity, but this is kind of like an illusion of rigor. We don't really understand. Like, for me, the difference between AI, artificial intelligence, and artificial general intelligence, AGI, is the difference between a human and a chimp. Humans go to the moon and build nuclear weapons. Chimps don't. Why? We don't exactly know. Like, we have many good guesses. Like, we have bigger brains, sure, but they're the same structure, generally speaking. They have the same kinds of neurons. Our genome is 99.9% the same. But still, there's this massive difference. It's not that we are 15% better at something than chimps are. We are vastly, meaningfully different. And the hypothesized AGI is the same kind of thing for AI systems, is that eventually when you have an AI system that can do anything a human can do, kind of by definition, it should be capable of doing everything a human can do, including everything a human civilization can do, develop new technologies, do politics, and so on. So going from these like narrow AI systems that help with protein folding or that generate pictures to these like agentic general intelligence, potentially self-improving systems, for me personally, is the biggest existential risk that humanity faces in the near future. But this is as contentious. I'd also be very interested in hearing his definition.
I'd say it somewhat differently. I'm not disagreeing. I just would put a different spin on it. I try to avoid using the expression AGI because people aren't sure what they mean by it. I use the expression superintelligence for things that are smarter than us. It's very unlikely they'll get to be as smart as us and just stop. I mean, it's conceivable. It's conceivable because of the training data. They'll just stop at our intelligence. But I don't believe that. They'll get smarter than us. I don't believe they'll get smarter than us at everything at exactly the same time. So already for things like games like chess and Go, they're much smarter than us and much more creative than us. They make much more creative moves in chess than people do. They'll get better at things like plumbing. Plumbing in old houses requires complicated physical manipulation. That'll be one of the last things they get better than us at. So they're not going to get better at everything all at the same time, but they are going to get better at sort of general reasoning problems. And I think that's what people mean by AGI. And so I prefer not to say AGI, but just say superintelligence. And that's coming.
Well, thank you for this. I mean, this is already looking way into the future, maybe not too much into the future. I would like to invite Ruth. Would you like to say anything in addition to this before we close the Q&A session?
Yes, thank you. I wanted to remark that I found it really helpful to hear these slightly differing perspectives on AI, and particularly on the issue of whether we can halt development of AI. I think there's a sense of the inevitability of AI. And so as we come, those of us who in the nuclear abolition community come to terms with the ways in which AI makes the nuclear threat more complex and more present, for me, it really underpins that whilst it doesn't appear that it's realistic or feasible necessarily to eliminate AI because of its benefits and because of the drivers for it, you know, the only good thing about that for me is it makes me realize that actually getting rid of nuclear weapons might be easier. And so I guess it makes me really want to double my efforts to work on that piece. But as I said before, whilst we work to eliminate nuclear weapons, whilst we're in that disarmament process, we need to be very mindful that having AI systems involved in governing nuclear weapons would increase their risk enormously. So thank you for all of the thought-provoking discourse. It's just been so.
Yes, thank you very much, Ruth. So now in closing, I would like to introduce our last speaker, who is Melissa Parke. Melissa Parke will say the final closing words of this webinar. So thank you very much, Melissa, for being here. Ms. Melissa Parke, she is Executive Director of ICAN, the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, which was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2017 for its groundbreaking efforts in promoting the UN Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Ms. Parke is a former Australia Minister for International Development and former Australian Federal Member of Parliament. Ms. Parke also worked as an international lawyer with the United Nations in Kosovo, Gaza, New York, and Lebanon, and served as a member of the UN group of eminent experts in Yemen investigating violations of international humanitarian rights and international humanitarian law. So it's a pleasure to have you with us, Melissa. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Karen, and hello, everybody. The American sociobiologist Edward Wilson said the real problem of humanity is that we have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. That nuclear weapons and AI can be described as godlike technology is not in doubt, and it's really not surprising that many of the experts working on these issues are scared. Nuclear weapons are the only devices ever created by humans that have the power to destroy all complex life on Earth. As Dr. Ruth Mitchell has set out so clearly, any use of nuclear weapons will have devastating consequences for humanity and the planet. So long as nuclear weapons remain anywhere, they are bound one day to be used, whether by design or by accident or miscalculation. There is a long list of nuclear accidents and near misses that have occurred over the decades, and those are just the ones we know about that could have already ended the world, but for sheer dumb luck. And we cannot expect our luck to last forever. As the UN Secretary General has said, when it comes to nuclear weapons, luck is not a strategy. There is only one other global policy issue that is remotely comparable in terms of its impact on planetary survivability, and that is, of course, the environment crisis. But nuclear bombs will kill us and the environment a lot faster. And when you add AI into this scenario, as Professor Hinton and Connor Leahy have so potently and quite terrifyingly described, we see that it becomes even more dangerous. We don't really understand how humans think, and we understand even less about how AI works, how it understands, and how it will evolve. AI is likely to evolve to become more intelligent than humans. So we certainly don't want to put what are essentially alien beings in charge of devices that can kill us, as Professor Hinton said. Already AI is speeding up warfare and reducing the time for nuclear decision-making. The combining of conventional and nuclear command and control systems and the modernisation of nuclear weapons is adding to the potential for fatal mistakes and increasing their vulnerability to cyber hacking. The fact that AI is completely unregulated is something that must be urgently addressed by decision makers. And there are differences of opinion, as we've heard today, on whether a moratorium on building more complex AI systems would be possible. US military leaders have said they will never allow AI to make nuclear use decisions. However, it is also not sufficient just to keep a human in the loop. As Nihon Hidankyo has noted, and as we all know, humans make mistakes too. When it comes to potentially civilization-ending weapons, the only way to eliminate the risk they pose, including any additional risk from AI, is to eliminate the weapons themselves. That ultimately is the message we want to leave you with today in this 80th anniversary year of the world's first nuclear weapons test and the 80th anniversaries of the US bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. There is a UN Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, or TPNW, that provides the pathway under international law for the elimination of nuclear weapons in a time-bound, verifiable manner. Half the countries of the world have already joined this treaty, and we need the other half to do so. Whatever our particular background and skills, we can all play our part in raising awareness about the threat posed at every moment by nuclear weapons, including the additional danger created by AI, and thus the urgency for total nuclear disarmament through the TPNW. As cities are the primary targets of nuclear weapons, we can ask our local governments to join the ICAN Cities Appeal in support of the TPNW. We can talk to our elected officials about the dangers posed by nuclear weapons and AI, and about the TPNW. We can write to newspapers, we can question our universities, banks and pension funds about their ethical investment policies, and we can join or donate to campaigns for nuclear abolition and AI regulation. Action is the antidote to feeling powerless. Author Yuval Noah Harari speaks of the power of human imagination to redirect our ingenuity from self-destruction to self-creation. Nuclear weapons are not part of the natural world that we are doomed to suffer. We do have a choice. We can choose to eliminate the existential risk by eliminating nuclear weapons. And of all the global challenges we face, this is the least complex. Humans built nuclear weapons and humans can dismantle them. All it requires is political will and leadership. The countries that have joined the TPNW are showing that leadership. The TPNW proves that as human beings, we have the capacity to think differently. We have the capacity to choose dialogue over confrontation, diplomacy over militarization, and disarmament over proliferation. We have the capacity as human beings to create a new future that respects the earth and each other. And so I want to now give a heartfelt thanks to our speakers today, Professor Jeffrey Hinton, It is wonderful you are able to take the time to give us the benefit of your wisdom so soon after winning the Nobel Prize for Physics last month. We are very grateful to Tanaka-san from Nihon Hidankyo for his wise and important words, also just after winning the Nobel Peace Prize. Thanks also to Connor Leahy from Conjecture and Dr. Ruth Mitchell from IPPNW for sharing your expertise with us. Thank you to our facilitator, Professor Karen Hallberg from Pugwash, and to IPPNW and Physicians for Social Responsibility for helping to organise this event. It is truly significant to have an event like this featuring 5 Nobel Prize recipients. Finally, thank you to our audience for your great questions and for tuning in now and in the future. As Martin Luther King Jr. said, we are confronted with the fierce urgency of now. We hope you are inspired to take action. Thank you all, and bye for now.